The sermon this morning is an essay my friend Laura Dunham Kaplan wrote. She was looking through a book called Perek Shira. It's a midrash, and it imagines that each of God's creatures has a verse of Torah that is particular to it, its theme song, if you will. It's a study in sheep, which is appropriate. You heard how much they played into this week's Torah portion. And she does something which I found entertaining. She says, what if we retold the story of Jacob and we used the literal names of the characters? We translated them, because all the names in the Jacob cycle of stories are related to sheep. And then she contemplates how human nature sometimes reflects animal nature. So here you go. There's a sweet medieval Jewish work of eco-spirituality called Perek Shira, Nature's Songbook. The author describes creation as a choir. Every animal sings a different biblical verse. Sheep chant, Mi chamocha be'elim Hashem. Who is like you among the princes Hashem? But why? The Art Scroll edition offers a theory. Sheep are prey. They have no defenses against predators. So they only survive because God is awesome. This is a terrible description of sheep. Actually, sheep have many means of defense. Their hearing and vision are hyper-acute. Sheep can pinpoint the exact source of a sound. They use each ear independently. Some breeds can see 300 degrees, almost a complete circle, around their bodies. And they share information through body language. When one wise sheep senses danger, an entire flock can move in unison. If they're wild sheep, they can walk right up a sheer vertical rock face where no predator can follow. Sure, to a large mammal, a sheep looks like dinner, but to a plant, a sheep looks like a fierce predator. Normally, plants defend themselves with bark, burrs, thorns, and shells. But none of these deter sheep. Sheep will eat an entire fruit tree, bark, shells, and all. So, why do well-defended predatory sheep say, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai? Here's my theory. Because their lives are closely aligned with the lives of the Israelites, the family of Jacob. Torah devotes 8 chapters to the coming-of-age story of the young shepherd Jacob. He and Esau are the twin sons of wealthy shepherds. Jacob, the younger twin, is described in Hebrew as perfect, and he takes shelter in tents. Esau, the elder, who happens to be unusually hairy, prefers hunting in the great outdoors, and Esau and Jacob struggle over their birthright. So Jacob leaves town to get away from his brother and find a wife. He meets the shepherd women Rachel and Leah. Rachel has beautiful form and Leah has weak eyes. They live with their father Laban. Jacob tries to marry Rachel, but Laban insists that he marry Leah first. As Jacob matures, he becomes a master sheep breeder, and eventually he separates from his father-in-law to start his own successful business. He encounters his brother Esau, who is now a wealthy landowner. Jacob's still afraid of his older brother, but he wrestles with his phantom and changes his name to Israel and reconciles with Esau. Let's hear that story again as if they were young sheep. 2 little sheep are born. The first is named Woolly, that's Esau, who was hairy, and Follower, Jacob, who was clinging to his brother's heel. Follower is a shepherd's dream lamb. He's perfectly formed with no physical imperfections. Woolly, however, is born with wool on his face and legs, and shepherds don't like this condition. The wool is coarse and hard to shear and impossible to sell. Shepherds consider it a plus only if the sheep have to live outdoors most of the time, so that's what Woolly does. He lives most of his life outdoors. When follower matures, he sets out on his own, so he can find a mate from a neighboring flock, and so he won't have to compete with Woolly. At a watering hole, follower meets a small flock of sheep. Two females named Ewe, E-W-E, that's Rachel, and Wild Mama, that's Leah, and their father, Whitey, that's Laban. Ewe is Yafat Toal, literally beautifully formed. Like follower, she was born with what shepherds call good conformance. Wild Mama has a non-fatal birth defect troubling to shepherds. Her inverted eyelids cause her eyes to tear. Follower instantly falls in love with Ewe and wants to mate with her, but Whitey, the dominant male, has other ideas. He pushes follower to have many lambs with Wild Mama. Eventually, Whitey allows follower to mate with Ewe. As expected, they produce a lamb with perfect conformance, Joseph, who fetches a very high price when he's later sold to Egypt. Over time, follower becomes a fully mature ram. He decides he's ready to set out on his own with his flock. He smells his brother Woolly in the air, and his hormones kick in. Even though he hasn't seen Woolly yet, he fights for dominance with a phantom. He feels that he wins. After all these years, he's finally the dominant male of his flock. He lets go of his birth name, Follower, and he calls himself Wrestler Prince, Yisrael. Well, that's certainly a different version of the story, isn't it? I seem to have lost the very end of the sermon. But, I'll check. No, not your fault, my fault. Oh wait, I found it. The sons of Wrestler Prince stay together in a single large flock, but they too struggle for dominance and independence. Eventually, the flock migrates to Egypt to graze in the fertile land of Goshen. Egyptians enslave them, but their shepherd, Moses, leads them to freedom across the Red Sea, and he points the way with his shepherd's staff. The Torah explicitly says sheep are part of the Exodus. Of course, sheep sing Mi Chamocha Be'elim Adonai. They sing it after crossing the sea. Are these singing sheep the Israelites themselves, or the livestock raised by the Israelites? Who knows? Lines blur. Are we uniquely human? Because we can be sheepish, foxy, chicken, catty, dogged, hawkish, dovish, and more. Waspish, good, McKen. Are we literally what we eat, completely shaped by our food system? Sheep were our ancestors' food. The sheep crossed the Red Sea. So did they also stand at Mount Sinai? Were they part of the covenant? Finally, we are both sheep and shepherd, looking out for each other, and we're all under the supervision of the great shepherd in the sky. Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai. It's a different take on the story. I wonder if we read other stories translating the names literally into English, if it would change our perspective on the tale.